Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John. How are you doing?
Sam, I'm doing okay. You know, I know some people that aren't doing okay today, and that's really anyone that voted for Nikki Haley or
Nikki Haley herself.
Nikki Haley herself. Here we are the day after Super Tuesday, and I've got to tell you, Sam, it was anything but Super Tuesday.
It was status quo, really. You know, all these alternate candidates, and nothing changed.
Well, it's kind of surprising. Not so long ago, I mean, we had Ramaswamy, DeSantis, Haley, and it seemed like, you know, while the former president, Donald Trump, had a sizable lead over those candidates or potential candidates, it seemed as though there was enough brain power, enough good ideas, enough decent candidates that at least we would be able to make it to Super Tuesday with really some question marks out there. But even after, I mean, the dust has settled and the smoke is cleared, yesterday was a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
It has been a foregone conclusion. It hasn't been close. Yesterday was a wipeout. I mean, just absolutely borderline shocking to me just how poorly Nikki Haley fared. And so here we are the day afterwards. And what's the rest of the political season going to be about?
Well, we've talked about it in several instances about how what you feel that people are feeling and then what the data ends up showing have been so different.
Yeah.
And it seems like that we've talked about that with inflation, we've talked about it with the economy, and politics has really been no different in that we've seen a lot of people be extremely dissatisfied with both candidates.
Yeah.
Yet they are overwhelmingly winning, and even when
I mean, it's not even close.
Not even close. And even when DeSantis seemed to be, before he technically entered, he was the one that they thought was really going to compete with Trump.
Yeah.
And maybe he got in too early and that fizzled out too quickly. What have you? That didn't work. Ramaswamy, you know, no one probably ever really gave him a chance.
Yeah, because no one really knew who he was.
No, but they
start.
started listening to him and thought, this guy, he outperformed, I think.
In another 4 years, I think
Yeah.
he comes back
Yeah.
to the table.
And then Nikki Haley was the last one. And, you know, I think she did a decent job of kind of opposing Trump. And yet, for all the people that have been dissatisfied with Trump in the Republican Party,
Something just
the data
come
didn't
across.
back it up in terms of voters. I mean,
Oh,
it was
heavens no.
basically a clean sweep. I mean,
Well, I think Vermont.
D.C. and Vermont.
Yeah.
But, you know, even then you look at the people voting in it, and they weren't necessarily all what I would consider Republicans.
Well, I mean, you take a look at our state here in Alabama, I think the spread was 70 percentage points, which would imply, what, 85-15?
Something like that.
Which is, I mean, that's just
Around there.
I think it's like good night. I mean, that's
Yeah.
I almost got as many votes, I suppose.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when I take a look at this, and now we know from here we are, not even the middle of March, all the way through November, it's going to be the same two guys. We're used to them. We know who they are. We know their personalities, unless something happens on the Democratic side and Joe Biden's not the candidate in November. We know both these fellows, and I just can't imagine what anyone's going to be saying other than just absolutely bad-mouthing the other one, as opposed to necessarily having a clear-cut vision for the world, for the world, really, the United States as well. It's just going to be bad-mouthing or I'm greater or something along those lines. And that's not really a message. I think, given the state of the American psyche right now, I don't necessarily think that's the message anyone really needs to hear. And I think that's part of the reason why we have the angst that we have as a society. I think angst is a good word, is because we've been at each other's throats for so long that even when we have decent news, we just don't believe it because things feel so uncertain.
They absolutely feel uncertain, and you're spot on that it's become just this line in the sand for both parties, really. It's like, it's not about what we can do or what we want to do or our goals, aspirations, what have you. It's who are you with, us or them?
Yeah.
Line in the
You
sand.
for or again.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And we've seen that on both sides. And again, everything you learn in any sort of behavioral class, economics class, we talked about politics a lot.
Yeah.
And the math says you should try and get as many voters in the middle if there's just two candidates.
That's not the way it works anymore.
It's not the way it works, and it's more focused on the further outside parts of both parties, and it's left, I would say, the biggest opening for a legitimate third party not that there's going to be one in a long time, because of that just shift away, it seems like that middle portion's grown bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, it's, I mean, you're absolutely right in saying they're just trying to attract those 20% on either sides, and the 60% of the rest of us that are in the middle just have to deal with it, I guess. I mean, what was the former president calling Nikki Haley, bird brain?
Yeah.
Stuff like
that.
Then
he even said, if you voted for her or supported her, I don't want you.
Yeah.
I don't want your support. I don't want your money.
Fine by me.
I'm sure they don't want to support him either if they were.
I think that's
everyone's on board with that.
I think that's fine. I'll tell you though that the reason why I bring this up is not necessarily to get too political here. It's because, we do have this race that's going on, if you want to call it a race. A couple of very old gentlemen running a race. It's more like a fast walk, I think.
Yeah.
It's okay. This is what we're going to have. How do the Democrats respond to it? How does the consumer respond to it? How do Americans respond to this, understanding that a huge swath of our public really views this as a game of Russian roulette? A game, an election, less voting for someone and their vision, and voting simply against the other person because you hate them that much.
I've seen shirts that I've seen it on both sides that say something along the lines of "not again." It's not advertising for the candidate they're voting for.
Not again.
Just not whether it's I'm not having Biden again or I'm not having Trump again. That has almost become a bigger focal point of advertisements for a lot of people. And frankly, I think it's because they don't even believe in the candidate that they are voting for. Half the time, if you're a Democrat that doesn't love Biden, but you probably really hate Trump, so you're saying this is the lesser of two evils. And
it goes both ways.
Yeah, exactly. It absolutely goes both ways. And it's an awful shift in politics to be going off of lesser evils instead of better candidates.
Well, I don't even know who the Libertarian candidate is thus far. Do you know who it is?
No, I think they're late to the party in terms of it's not going to be Jo Jorgensen again. I think she did a great job.
If they can pull up someone that doesn't have a third eyeball in the middle of their forehead, they should be this support this year.
And RFK is going to be running as an independent.
That's a hard one.
It is, but he has gained a shocking amount of support, I would say, for someone who's
I think the name and his appearance and all that stuff helps. He's not a bad-looking guy, and he sounds like a Kennedy and all that type of stuff. But the anti-vax stuff kind of
it's people have gravitated towards him. The name is the easy answer, but also because it's like this, it's just not one of the other two.
Yeah.
I would say in a normal year, if there was candidates actually just focused on being the best candidate, not being the lesser of two evils, his support would probably be a quarter of it at most, what he actually has.
Well, I mean, we're throwing up almost nightmare scenarios where we're talking about just, hey, anyone. But I used that word previously, Sam, that word angst. And I do believe that there's an element of it. I'm going to talk about the market for just a second. I want to go back to that original question. How does the consumer behave over the next 8 months with this same level of angst? Do we change our consumption patterns, particularly if the Federal Reserve doesn't do anything? But I would talk about the angst. I was speaking to a reporter yesterday talking about just the massive run the cryptocurrencies, in particular Bitcoin, has been on really for the last 2 weeks. Gold is at or near all-time highs. You would think with the type of run that these things have had, the dollar would be sinking. That's
not the case.
Not the case. Matter of fact, the dollar has rallied 2% thus far this year. So what is behind this kind of strength in these alternative stores of values, these alternative asset classes, if you will, if the dollar's strong, if the stock market has been strong, if all these things are in place, why are people fleeing to other asset classes, maybe getting rid of dollars or just getting to someplace else? And when I was talking to the reporter, a friend of mine named Paul, I said there has to be something other than just interest rates.
Yeah,
there's got to be some of this has to be due to, well, there's a fear of missing out, all that stuff on the crypto side, but it started with something, and it had to have been, I don't feel
100%, because one of the usual suspects focusing on gold first has been lower real interest rates.
Yeah.
You know, it's basically non-interest bearing cash in a sense. You know, so you're missing out on less the lower real rates go. That's a real strong correlation. But we're not seeing that. That's not driving it. We're not seeing real rates go much lower, especially to have gold at a pretty quiet all-time highs. Usually I feel like it gets talked about so much.
I mean, you'd see more ads on the TV. It's kind of crazy.
You see everything. But
finally, the gold bugs get it right, and you can't find one.
Yeah, I think they all passed away for the most part. But and Bitcoin's the same way. Angst, you mentioned that word. There's, you can't put your finger on one thing that's causing it, but you're spot on that everyone feels this kind of angst, and it's at least kind of.
Matter of fact, I have not spoken to anyone that doesn't feel
hedging
that
your
way.
bets a little bit.
Yeah.
Whether it's Bitcoin or not, if you're like, not only is the debt getting really bad, but the parties are further against each other.
Yeah,
Russia's back into things. Iran's not backing down. The
Chinese are putting out ships like nobody's business.
Yeah, we can't get Yemen under control.
I mean, that's the whole deal. If we can't get Yemen under control, how are we supposed to get the remainder of the world under control? And do you think maybe that one with the Houthis or Houthis or whatever they are in the mountains of northern Yemen, do you think that maybe it was just one of the proverbial straws on that camel's back that, okay, we handled the war in the Eastern Europe reasonably well. I mean, it came out of the gates and people got all upset. But after that, it kind of went to, back page to a degree.
Yeah, it's not on the cover of the Wall Street Journal every day.
I mean, it's a
like
major war, and it's not A1. And then we kind of had gee whiz, kind of a quiet year. We had some bank failures, but then we had bank failures kind of creeping around in there. And then we had October 7th of last year, and that's still going on in Gaza with apparently no end in sight. Now we have these people from a country that most Americans couldn't find on a map that are out there firing missiles at us and actually sinking ships in the Red Sea, disrupting 15% of global trade. People that from one of the least developed countries in the world, from one of the most backward places on earth, are disrupting the
massive amount
of global trade with 21st century armaments.
Yeah.
I mean, if that doesn't get you...
Iranian-funded drones. I mean, it's just all...
it's just all of this stuff.
Add China on top of it. You're seeing some change in their rhetoric around Taiwan and the peaceful reunification kind of being backed out of some of their main statements. And that kind of feels like this is probably happening at some point, right? I mean, I feel like that's at least the sense that people get, is whether it's next year, 10 years from now. I mean, it feels like that's coming too, and that's going to be problematic. And
and now we have completely delved away from where I thought we were going to go with this podcast, where you thought it was either. I've got to ask you a question. As a Gen Z, in taking a look at everything that's going on in the world right now, everything we just mentioned, all these nightmare scenarios, we have Middle East, we have Eastern Europe, we have the Arabian Peninsula, we have South China Sea, all that stuff. You have all these things. And really, America, United States, is left with one of two options. Go big or go home. I mean, tell me what the other option is, because right now we seem to be trying to swim in this relatively narrow lane where we're not going big, but we're not going home.
It's an identity crisis.
And now all of a sudden things just keep popping up. And given the way we are and the way things are, we just simply can't respond to all this in the measure of force that we would need to without really throwing the entire world into war. And frankly, our stockpiles wouldn't allow it right now, and we would ultimately lose that war.
Yeah, it's an identity crisis, and you're right. It's if you read the articles about how we're defending ships in the Middle East right now, shipping lanes, we're launching missiles that cost millions of dollars each.
At drones that cost $300, $400.
Yeah. I mean, I don't care who you are, and if you have your own currency, that's unsustainable.
Yeah.
And so it's this identity crisis, and you're right. It's this. We've talked about it with the dollar becoming less of the reserve currency. There's no good alternatives, but it seems like the U.S. it feels like we're kind of on board with, like, let's loosen our rein a little bit. Let's back off on being, the global superpower that is in charge of everything, or at least we're not controlling situations like we once did.
No.
And
Once
in some areas, I think
to.
that's good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say across the board it's not black and white, but we don't know what we want to be. I don't think, and I think going back to I think our political system, at least how it was designed to be, is one of the best in the world. However, focusing on these 4-year cycles of going back and forth, especially when it gets more polarizing,
makes it very difficult when our foreign policy changes every 4 years.
Exactly.
Or at least
that's what I'm getting
face of
at,
our
especially when the
policy.
two sides of it have gotten more polarizing. Even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I think maybe some of the differences were probably not as extreme as they've become now.
They weren't.
And probably further and further back, that they got less and less different. Largely, I won't say for every 4-year cycle, but this back and forth of what's important to us and what's not, it has to weigh on a country. It has to weigh on what other countries think of us. Why not wait it out 4 years if you're in the current administration's bad side?
Yeah, why not?
I mean, there's restrictions in Iran. On Iran, those were lifted. Why not wait it out 4 years and hope it goes the other way?
Where for your Benjamin Netanyahu would just give the thumb to the Biden administration, which the left is upset with how permissive they think he's being with the Israelis, and the right feels the other way. But if I'm Netanyahu, I'm looking at the polls going, I'm not really going to pay much attention to you, Joe, because you're not going to be around in a while.
Exactly. So you have this kind of horse race, this jockeying of who's on whose side, even as far as countries' allies, and what that looks like, and that's an unsustainable path for global policy, foreign policy.
And taking it back to sort of Super Tuesday where we started, it was such a whitewash across the board. I think American Samoa voted for some dude from Baltimore or something like that as a write-in candidate or something. I don't know what happens. But it's been a clean sweep across the board, both sides.
Yeah.
And Biden has been a pretty unpopular president.
He's more unpopular now than Trump was.
And so pretty unpopular president, but yet the Democrats didn't bring anyone up to challenge against him, which was a little surprising. But if you take a look at it, who are they going to bring up besides maybe Gavin Newsom, who's a very polarizing figure.
He's becoming increasingly more polarizing and less likable.
And the thing is, I thought the Republicans brought up a much better slew of candidates than what they had in 2016, but, it didn't go anywhere. And so when you see the results that we saw on Super Tuesday, and granted we're in Alabama, there wasn't any doubt that Donald Trump was going to win, but there were other things on the ballot. I don't know anyone who voted.
I didn't.
I did not vote. Janet always votes. She didn't vote. I walked around. I wouldn't have known yesterday was an election day, but for the fact that I had to drive by Canterbury Methodist Church at one point, and the parking lot was a little more crowded than it normally is in mid-afternoon.
Yeah, not like it would be for the presidential election.
And so I don't. No one talked about it. Very little. Just very little interest in it. It's more like almost resignation.
Yeah.
It just kind of resignate. We're voting again. It's really even a choice. I don't really even have a choice. It's like going to vote in North Korea. It's kind of like, here's your choice.
Your candidate is chosen.
Here's your candidate. I mean, here's your choice. And so it's almost like that. Did you talk with anyone about Super Tuesday here in Alabama?
No.
I mean, I'd almost forgot that we were participating.
You could have told me that we were not a part of it. I would have said, oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're not completely out of it. Maybe a little bit, but I mean, we're not completely out of it, people. No. And that's a problem.
It's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem. And it's part of the problem. It's a problem when there's no competition for the biggest elected office in the land. There's no competition. The people that we've had, they were running against each other. We've already had them, and they're pretty unpopular nationwide. And not trying to take not one thing or another. I don't care. I mean, it's just what side of the fence you're on. You have to admit that your candidate is not universally loved. And you have just a bunch of people just kind of staying away.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that unless something dramatic happens, a lot of folks might stay away in November as well.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like 2020, I don't think, in terms of the number of people voting.
And especially in states like Alabama on both sides.
Yeah.
I think you're probably going to see a lot of people where, frankly, my vote doesn't matter a whole lot. I hate to say that, but my vote in the presidential election in the state of Alabama does not matter a whole lot.
Well, I mean, in truth, I mean, I'm just going to throw it out there and people can get upset. If we were only voting on the president in November, nothing else, I probably wouldn't bother showing up. However, we're voting on other things.
Yeah, there's some
other things that'll be in there.
Legitimate things.
And all that type of stuff. So I'll go vote. But I didn't vote this go around. I guess the point is we're trying to make here.
Yeah.
Super Tuesday's coming past. No one really paid a ton of attention. You can go to the website, media websites today, not a ton of coverage on. This used to be the biggest story about every 4 years. This is massive, what's going on. And Biden won everything. They only have a small challenger. And then Nikki Haley just, I don't see how she whiffed so bad, but she did. And so it's over with. And couple that with just the state of global affairs, I don't see how we don't continue this sort of sense of unease. Angst is a word we've thrown about. I think that's now the 5th time. I don't think there's any way we get away from that in the short term. And as a result, it'll be real interesting to see whether or not the correlation between asset classes like cryptocurrencies and even gold will ultimately have more to do with consumer confidence than they do the strength of the dollar. And I said as much, I posited as much, or opined as much to the reporter yesterday. Maybe moving forward, we'll find a much higher correlation between cryptocurrencies and public confidence. That correlation will be, obviously, I guess that'd be a negative correlation. That negative correlation, that's where the correlation is going to be.
Could be.
And so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, right now we don't know how to value these things moving forward. We just, direction.
No one can ever know how to value that.
That's never know, but all of a sudden it's kind of like, hey, direction of the country goes from 50 to 60. I'm loading up on the things.
Yeah.
That type of deal.
Especially as there's more global access to it and easier access to it.
Well, there you have it. I mean, my goodness, start off talking about Super Tuesday, and what do you know? Lackluster Super Tuesday has led us to the first coherent way to trade cryptocurrencies I've ever heard of. Just wait until the direction of the country starts heading south, according to public polls. Load up on the bad boys.
Good work.
All right. Well, guys, we always love to hear from you all. So if you have any questions or comments, please, by all means, let us know. You can always reach us sending us an email to tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, OAKWORTH.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we got to say or how we think, you can always go again to oakworth.com, OAKWORTH.com. Take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab. Scroll down, take a look at all the URLs for previous Trading Perspectives podcasts, URLs for our blog/newsletter Common Sense, and then also links to our quarterly magazine and analytical piece called Macro and Market. Good stuff there. All right, Sam, I'm going to give you a last chance to talk about this very exciting topic.
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.